Welcome to the ancient ruins of the Monkwearmouth Jarrow Abbey. For it was in the church which still stands on the site last night that something truly remarkable occurred. Outside, men and women from Tide and Tide events, dressed in Saxon costume, are patiently and eagerly waiting. Inside there is a buzz of activity around an altar, and those from St. Paul's Church, the Friends of Bede's World, and of course Groundworks are humming with anticipation. You see, it was on this site around 1,300 years ago that Saxon monks achieved something very special. They were commissioned in the year AD 692 to produce 3 beautiful copies of the Bible. And by the year 716, 1,300 years ago, a copy of the Codex Amiatinus was delivered to the Pope. These were meticulously produced in Latin, in the insular style, on 1,029 leaves of vellum. Each book weighed around 35 kilograms, and each was a treasure, a towering achievement celebrated in the church to this day. But this day is different. Today the Codex returns to Jarrow in the form of a painstakingly produced facsimile, one of only 2 copies of the book, which have only been made possible through the efforts of Dame Professor Rosemary Cramp.
When one considers the expenditure of capital, both physical and intellectual, in their manufacture, well, I think it's a consideration is quite awesome. And we have tried to explain this in the new exhibition, which I hope you'll all have time to see when we go up to the museum. What happened to them between 716, when we know the Codex Amiatinus was sent to the Pope, and to the 18th century, when it was held in the monastery of Monte Amiata, is one thing. There, its dedication page had been altered, but because of the excellence of the script and the illustrations, it was considered for many years an Italian book. But by the late 19th century, the original dedication to Ceolfridus Anglorum had been recognized. Now, it's a huge and fragile book, even thicker than that book there, because it's written on vellum. And it hasn't traveled far outside Florence. But it is consulted by many biblical scholars because it includes the leading text of St. Jerome's Vulgate, whose scholarly revision of the biblical text went behind, as you know, the Greek to the Hebrew. However, by the millennium, modern technology had enabled a full-scale facsimile to be made for Monte Amiata, using skills which you'll hear about in a minute from Manuel Vestri. And having heard about this, it seemed altogether fitting that such a facsimile should also be made to be appreciated in our area where it was created. And there is much in this book that illuminates the world in which Bede lived. He was a relatively young man when all the excitement of its production was taking place. But it did affect his work and his thinking in many of his writings. And just to give you one illustration, in the front of your programs, which I'm sure you've all seen, you have the illustration of the scribe seated in his study, writing. His books and all the paraphernalia of creating a book are scattered on the floor around him. Now, this scene has been variously interpreted, so extensively interpreted, I'm sure you'll be glad I'm not going to tell you all. But it actually sums up much of the losses and rebirth of knowledge from antiquity to Bede's day and even to ours. It's surely fitting, though, that it should start its journey back here. It's an inspiriting thought, isn't it? That these very walls behind us, in what was once a small Eastern church, which had just echoed to the music of the bishop's consort and his singers, would have also absorbed the chant of at least some of the scribes who produced the Amiatinus.
Next we heard from Dr. Manuela Vestri, and how Rosemary entreated her to produce a second facsimile of the Codex.
It would be a hugely important event to have such a facsimile arrive in Jarrow, and of continuing interest to scholars and the general public alike. On a more personal note, I would consider it the crowning event of a lifetime spent in the study of early Northumbria, its archaeology, art, and learning. Please let us try to remove the obstacles which stand in the way of the production of another facsimile and its transmission to Jarrow.
A whole manuscript that survives from this period is even rarer. And the rarest is a huge manuscript that survives from Anglo-Saxon period. As you can see, it is physically massive. It weighs, I'm told, around 35 kilograms. For those of you who are more used to pounds, it's around 75 pounds. It's about a meter tall, and there are over 2,000 pages written on either side. And it's about a quarter of a meter deep. So it's very large by any manuscript standards. Of the cultural inheritance of antiquity that Dame Rosemary referred to, and the sort of the contemporary currents of development within Christian Europe. So it is not at the very edges of the world, but actually very much of the world, of that world, and at the centre. Its script is very remarkable, and as Dame Rosemary told us earlier, was so good and so persuasive that it was thought to be of Italian production.
But why is it important that it's here? Why is it important that this facsimile is here, not just in this place, but in the confines of Great Britain? Well, obviously it has huge potential for researchers. It enables them, if they shouldn't wish to make that very tedious and tiresome trip to Florence, to come here and study it. And obviously the one-to-one access enables the manuscript not to be further put under pressure, but people can look at the facsimile instead. So it has huge potential, I think, for research and the ready access.
Next, the Church formally welcomed this copy of a sacred text, which one church warden told me had been eagerly awaited for decades, into its midst.
May the word of God be on our lips.
May the word of God be in our hearts.
And to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Next, a formal procession from the church to the Bede's World Museum, with a Saxon escort, of course. This museum has recently seen difficult days, but this evening was a time to celebrate. And so here, on the site of the monk Wearmouth Jarrow Abbey, the place which produced Anglo-Saxon England's greatest scholar, the Venerable Bede, a beautiful copy of an irreplaceable treasure has returned home. Much to the delight, and only because of the passion, of another great local scholar.